Well, hi, my name's Andy Tidy and welcome back to another video from Life at 2.3 miles an hour. Regular viewers may twig that when I introduce the channel as Life at 2.3 miles an hour, it means that the content is likely to stray a little bit away from canal history, which is the mainstay of Canal Hunter. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to take a few weeks out to make 3 episodes all about steam engines. And let me tell you why. Well, back in the late 1960s, when men were flying to the moon in rockets with less computer power than the camera I'm shooting this on, there was a simultaneous boom in the sale of working toy model steam engines. And in the UK, that meant just one company, Mamod. My parents gave me a Mamod Traction engine for Christmas in 1970 or 71, and I've got fond memories of it going round and round our kitchen floor in crazy circles. Steam pouring from its funnel, oily water dribbling onto the floor, and the smell of burning meths permeating the whole house. Fire, steam and action. Well, what was there not to like? Well, the steam engine they gave me was this one. A treasured possession which is now over 50 years old, and it carries the scars of years of neglect and abuse. Maybe I better call it the patina of age. Well, I know from the YouTube analytics that the main Canal Hunter audience tends to be chaps of my age and slightly older. And we were collectively almost certainly the key target market for Mamod back in the 1960s and 70s. What's more, if you watch Canal Hunter, you are almost certain to be interested in the Industrial Revolution, and that inevitably takes you back to the age of steam. So I suspect this short series is going to hit the spot with most of you. Actually, looking back on it, it was an amazingly generous present. These days, the same engine sells for about £250, so I guess it was the same effective price back then. Anyway, I loved my traction engine, and whilst I didn't play with it all the time, it was regularly taken off the shelf, dusted down and taken out for a spin. The appeal of these little models appears to be enduring, because when I recently posted a clip of a trial run on Facebook, I was quite blown away by the level of interest. It turns out that many of my contemporaries have got one of these little gems tucked away in their loft. Almost a guilty pleasure, which they can't quite bring themselves to get rid of. Well, my traction engine lived on the shelf in my shed for decades, but it did have a brief reprise about 25 years ago when I dusted it down and steamed it to show it to my children. The problem was it didn't actually work very well. It had lost its steering pole, the scuttle had gone, as had the front axle spring, but the real killer were the pressure seals and the soldering. I could get it hot enough to steam, but so much escaped it just wouldn't run properly. Now, this was back in the pre-internet days, so sourcing spares was far more challenging. Well, I did a bit of a bush fix on the traction engine. I cut up some bits of leather and some bits of rubber from inner tubes and kind of squeezed them into place. But neither of them really worked very well. And then there was the problem of the missing drive spring. It had long since stretched beyond usefulness, so I resorted to elastic bands, which resulted in a rather erratic progress, kind of like a steam-powered kangaroo. So the traction engine was returned to the shelf for another 25 years, and it gathered dust and dents in equal measure, shedding a few more accessories along the way. So that brings me to now, with 2 curious grandchildren who spotted the old engine up on the shelf, and they wanted, actually it's fair to say they demanded, to see it run. Now, I'm not daft, and there is no way I'm going to try out an antique steam engine at full pressure for the first time in decades with them anywhere near it. So I ordered a service kit off the internet, added a new scuttle, front spring, and I bodged the low pressure pipes just to see if it would go. And it did. Well, this is the Mamod TE1A, the traction engine I was given in 1970 or 1971, and I've disassembled it to do a little bit of service on all the working parts. And I've replaced all the seals, so it's just a case of putting it together and making it go. To start with, we have got the emergency valve. Really important that this one functions, so we'll put a little bit of oil into here. And that drops into the middle of the brass tank. So if the pressure gets too high, the top will rise up and the steam will blow off. Next, we need to put in the whistle. The whistle also goes into the back of the boiler. We'll put a little bit of lubrication onto the threads. Lube is always your friend. Now we have to be a little bit careful with putting this in, because when we pull the lever and the whistle blows, we don't want scalding hot steam coming out all over our fingers. So it's important that we get the aperture for the steam valve to point away from my fingers. Now, to get this one in tight, you need a 5/16 open spanner. It's not often these days that I get to use my imperial tools. Nearly everything else is metric. You'll find that there is nothing modern about Mamod whatsoever. There we go. That's in, nice and firm. We need to replace the level gauge. This is simply when you fill it, the water will dribble out. The later models had a sight glass, but this was a very simple version. And now we have to put on the control mechanism. One little piston, put a bit of lube in there, bit of lube on the friction plate, and then it needs to be attached. This is a little bit tricky because you've got a spring on a thread. I don't know who came up with this particular design, but it is consistent across every single Mamod engine. So that goes in there, sprung loaded, through that hole. Now I do recall that getting this bolt into the piston is probably the hardest part of the whole process. In fact, I find it somewhat easier just to start the thing off by twisting the piston onto the nut. And if I leave enough flex, I can just get the piston attached and then crank it up tight. This doesn't have to be very tight, just tight enough not to fly off when it's operating. There we go, and it's forward to go forward, back to go back. I don't know who at Mamod came up with this idea. It's a consistent mechanism across nearly all of their range, and it works remarkably well. Then it's just a case of applying the drive belt to the rear wheel and onto the flywheel, and you have it. Methylated spirits goes into the methylated spirits container underneath, warms it all up, and then it runs. So I think we're almost ready to give this a bit of a go. Let's just put the lid on and fire her up. One Mamod traction engine, all ready to go. One little funnel in, overflow out, and fill her up. There we go. So, replace the pressure valve. And just crank it down finger tight onto its pressure seals. Same to the overflow hole. Close the lid. Set the little beast into neutral. And let's do something about some fire. Now, I suspect that I, like everybody else who plays with these machines, will end up overfilling the little mess filler. Oops. So let's get this mess lit up. End result is almost invisible, but I can feel it's a light. Pop that into the steam engine and we'll wait. Well, at some point when my first traction engine sat on the shelf in my shed, it fell off. I remember it rolling off, landed on my knee, and then sadly landed on its funnel on the ground. This bent the funnel back and pretty much broke the solder. It was certainly coming very loose. Well, a few weeks ago, my grandchildren did indeed get to see it run, but that proved to be the final run with the chimney in its state. It fell off. Yep.
Whoa, what was that?
I'm going forward now.
It's fine. It's ready.
Austin, let's run! I'm going out of it. This is not me too, eh? It's coming down. My train's coming down.
So, if we're going to have steam trials, we need to get that funnel fixed. Well, I did attempt to fix on the funnel using an antique electrician's soldering iron inherited from my wife's granddad. And whilst it achieved a fix of sorts, it really wasn't good enough. As Clint Eastwood said in Dirty Harry, a man has got to know his limitations. And as I've had a go at soldering this with indifferent end results, I know a man that can do it better. Alan. You might remember him from the Wednesbury Old Canal episode. He is a skilled metal worker as well as a woodworker. So I'm going to rope in Alan and see what we can do to get this thing working.
You don't present the solder under the torch flame. You heat the metal work up and let the that's better. Let the metal melt the solder, not the flame. So you've got to get this hot enough to. It's going to take a while, I think, to get this hot enough
I think you're right. It's copper at the back, or an alloy of some sort. probably steel.
Starting to warm up a bit.
Well, we know how this TE1A works, but you may feel a little bit shortchanged at not seeing me actually overhaul the engine. If you are, fear not, because it just so happens that I've been given this. This is a TE1, the earlier version of the Mamod Traction engine that I have. This one needs some real TLC if we're going to see it run again, because I know for a fact this one hasn't steamed for 50 years. In actual fact, this extra traction engine that I've acquired used to belong to a friend of mine. And I'm going to take a close look at the mechanicals as we attempt to get it going in the next episode. So Steve, if you're watching, this is indeed your traction engine. Let's hope it doesn't explode in my face. So with two near identical traction engines, I'm planning to hold something of a traction engine trials and see which one performs the best. And more crucially, to see if their performance lives up to the advertising hype back in the 1960s. I've got no doubt that this challenge will be spurred on by two very enthusiastic grandchildren. Which one goes the fastest? Which one goes the longest? Indeed, will the brass tanked one run at all? Only time will tell. So, till next time, cheerio.